Hello and welcome. You've arrived at a place that gently slows the world down, a place where busy thoughts can soften and tired minds are free to rest. As you settle into your pillow tonight, let your breath slow and your shoulders sink deeper into the comfort beneath you. Feel the weight of the day lifting away, dissolving like morning mist over a quiet lake. Tonight, we're going to travel through time together, exploring a gesture so familiar you've probably never stopped to wonder about its journey through the centuries. A simple clasping of hands. A moment of connection that has whispered the same message across thousands of years. I come in peace. Close your eyes and imagine you can feel the texture of time itself beneath your fingertips. Smooth stone, worn by countless footsteps. The rough grain of ancient wood. The cool touch of marble columns standing silent in moonlight. We're going to trace the story of the handshake, a gesture that began in tension and fear, transformed through centuries of human interaction, and emerged as perhaps the most universal symbol of trust our species has ever created. Let the rhythm of these words carry you gently backward through history to a world where every greeting carried the weight of survival itself. Picture the sun rising over ancient Athens in the 5th century before Christ. The air smells of olive oil and wood smoke, of dust kicked up by sandaled feet on stone pathways. In this world, meeting a stranger wasn't the casual encounter we know today. It was a moment charged with uncertainty, with the ever-present possibility of violence. Warriors walked these streets, their hands never far from the hilts of their swords. Trust was a precious commodity, earned slowly and demonstrated carefully. It was here, in this atmosphere of cautious vigilance, that the Greeks developed what they called dexiosis. The word itself means the offering of the right hand, the good hand. Imagine two soldiers approaching each other on a narrow mountain path. The tension in the air is almost tangible. Each man's weapon hand, his right hand, hovers near his blade. Then, in a gesture that must have required tremendous courage that first time it was ever attempted, one extends his right hand forward, palm open, fingers spread, empty, vulnerable. The message is clear and unmistakable. I hold no weapon. I mean you no harm. The other warrior, after a heartbeat of hesitation, does the same. Their hands meet, grip, hold. In that moment, something profound happens. Two strangers have chosen peace over violence, trust over suspicion. This wasn't just a greeting. It was a statement of peaceful intent that both men had to actively choose, second by second, to maintain. The ancient Greeks understood the power of this gesture so deeply that they carved it into stone. On funeral steles throughout Athens, you can still see these handshakes preserved in marble, the limestone, the granite. At the Kerameikos Archaeological Museum, at the entrance cloister, stands a funerary monument from the grave of Agathon and Sosicrates, dating to approximately the 5th century BC. 3 figures are captured in stone, frozen in their farewell handshake for eternity. At the Acropolis Museum in Athens, another stone slab from the late 5th century shows the goddesses Hera and Athena themselves clasping hands, the divine gesture of accord between patron deities. The Greek poet Homer, writing centuries before even these monuments were carved, understood what the handshake meant. In both the Iliad and the Odyssey, he describes warriors and heroes offering their right hands as symbols of agreement, as oaths of trust, as comfort for the bereaved. This wasn't mere courtesy. In Homer's world, a handshake was a bond as strong as any written contract. Perhaps stronger, because it was sealed with the vulnerability of an outstretched, weaponless hand. On those ancient funerary monuments, the handshake often represented that final goodbye between the deceased and their loved ones. The Greeks called it a gesture symbolizing connectedness, a way of saying that even in death, the bonds between people endured. When you grasped another person's hand, you were acknowledging them as an equal. Gods shook hands with gods, warriors with warriors, athletes with their competitors, acknowledging respect even in rivalry. The handshake said, "I see you as someone like me, someone worthy of trust, someone with whom I share this human experience." As the Roman Empire rose and absorbed the traditions of Greece, the handshake evolved. The Romans understood power, and they understood suspicion. Their version of the greeting was more practical, more aggressive in its caution. Instead of the Greek palm-to-palm clasp, Romans would grasp each other's forearms, gripping the flesh just below the elbow. Imagine two Roman citizens meeting in the Forum, the center of civic life in Rome. One reaches out, but not for the other's hand. Instead, his grip closes around the forearm, fingers pressing against cloth and skin, checking, always checking. The purpose was unmistakable, to ensure there was no knife hidden up the sleeve. The Romans called this dextrarum iunctio, the joining of right hands, but it was really the joining of forearms, a practical security measure in a world where assassination was a recognized political tool. As Rome's legions marched across Europe, they carried this custom with them, spreading it to lands that would one day become France, Spain, Britain, Germany. The handshake, or its Roman cousin, began to root itself in the consciousness of these far-flung territories. And as the empire eventually crumbled and gave way to the medieval period, the gesture transformed once more. Picture now the Middle Ages. Castles rise against gray skies. Knights in heavy armor move with the weight of metal and mail, their footsteps echoing on stone floors. The smell of damp wool, of horses, of pitch torches burning in dim corridors. This is a world of feudal oaths and binding ceremonies, where a man's word was his bond, and breaking that word could mean death. The handshake became woven into the very fabric of medieval society. But the medieval knight added something new to the ancient gesture. They knew, just as the Romans had known, that small weapons could be concealed in clothing. A dagger could slip easily into the voluminous sleeves of medieval garments. The heavy fabrics, the layers of cloth, created perfect hiding places for thin blades. And so the knights developed a solution. They would take the other person's hand and shake it firmly, up and down, up and down. The shaking motion, they reasoned, would dislodge any hidden weapons, sending them clattering to the stone floor. Can you picture it? Two knights in full regalia meeting before a tournament, the rustle of silk surcoats over mail armor, the creak of leather. One knight extends his gauntleted hand, and the other grasps it. Then comes that distinctive motion, the vigorous shaking, 3 or 4 pumps up and down. It's a test and a trust all at once. If a blade falls free, both men know where they stand. If nothing falls, the shake itself becomes a declaration. We meet as equals in honor, with clean hands and pure intent. Medieval society embedded the handshake into ceremony and ritual. When a vassal swore loyalty to his lord, they would clasp hands over the oath. When merchants sealed a deal in the marketplace, their agreement was confirmed by gripping hands. Sometimes for several long moments, the deal considered sealed when the hands finally parted. The quality of a man's handshake said something about his character. A lord's grip was expected to be firm, confident. A knight's shake demonstrated his strength and honesty. Even the handshake between nobles and commoners carried information about status and relationship, though the gesture itself implied a baseline of mutual respect that earlier eras might not have recognized. Fast forward now to 17th century England. The country is recovering from the turmoil of civil war. In this landscape of social upheaval and religious questioning, a radical Protestant movement emerges. They call themselves the Society of Friends, but the world knows them as Quakers. And among their many revolutionary ideas is a belief that will reshape how humans greet each other. The conviction that all people are equal before God, regardless of their social rank. In 17th century English society, greetings were elaborate performances of hierarchy. When you met someone of higher social standing, you were expected to bow deeply, perhaps even scrape, removing your hat, averting your eyes. Men would take off their hats in the presence of nobles. Women would curtsy, sinking low to acknowledge their place in the social order. These gestures communicated and reinforced the rigid class structure that defined English life. To greet someone improperly was to commit a social transgression that could have real consequences. The Quakers looked at these elaborate rituals and said, no. They saw in these bows and curtsies the perpetuation of inequality, the idea that some humans were inherently more valuable than others. This contradicted their core belief that there was that of God in every person, rich or poor, noble or common. They needed a way to greet each other and to greet others that reflected their egalitarian values. They chose the handshake, not the aristocratic hand kiss, not the deferential bow, but the simple, direct clasping of one person's hand by another, palm to palm, equal to equal. When a Quaker extended his hand to another person, whether that person was a fellow Quaker or a member of the nobility, the gesture carried a profound message. I see you as my equal. I will not bow to you, for we stand on the same ground before the divine. Imagine the scandal this caused. Picture a Quaker merchant in his plain gray coat, standing before a nobleman in velvet and ermine. The nobleman expects the usual performance, the hat removed, the deep bow, the murmured honorifics. Instead, the Quaker keeps his hat firmly on his head, meets the nobleman's eyes directly, and extends his hand. Some Quakers were beaten for this refusal to show proper deference. Some were imprisoned. The authorities saw in this simple gesture a threat to the entire social order. They weren't entirely wrong, but the Quaker handshake contained something powerful: warmth. Rendell Harris, a British Quaker scholar, later wrote that the handshake was sacramental for friends, that you could feel love flowing out through the fingertips. This wasn't a cold, perfunctory gesture. It was an expression of genuine recognition and respect, of seeing the light of the divine in another human being and honoring it with your touch. The Quakers took their beliefs and their handshakes with them as they immigrated. In the late 17th and early 18th centuries, many friends left England for the American colonies, particularly Pennsylvania, which William Penn had founded as a haven for religious tolerance. In these new communities, the Quaker handshake became the standard greeting, and gradually, its egalitarian spirit began to spread beyond the Society of Friends itself. The handshake offered something appealing to the emerging merchant class and to ordinary people in the growing cities of the 18th century. It was simpler than the elaborate courtesies of the aristocracy. It was direct, efficient, honest. In a world that was slowly, painfully beginning to imagine social mobility and opportunity, the handshake seemed to fit the spirit of the times. You didn't need to know complex rules of etiquette to extend your hand. The gesture itself was democratic. By the time the American colonies declared their independence and began to form a new nation, the handshake was firmly established as the American greeting. It fit perfectly with the revolutionary idea that all men were created equal. George Washington shook hands. Benjamin Franklin shook hands. The handshake became woven into the American identity, a physical expression of democratic ideals. The 19th century brought industrialization, urbanization, and globalization on a scale humanity had never before experienced. Railroads connected distant cities. Steamships crossed oceans with increasing speed and regularity. Telegraph lines began to web the continents together. And in this increasingly interconnected world, the handshake spread. Business provided the vehicle. Merchants traveling through Europe in the 19th century discovered that the handshake provided a perfect greeting for commercial interactions. It was formal enough for important occasions, but not so elaborate as to waste time. It conveyed seriousness and reliability. A firm handshake came to be associated with trustworthiness, with a man whose word could be trusted, whose business dealings would be honorable. By the late 19th century, etiquette manuals were providing detailed instructions on the proper handshake. An 1877 publication advised its readers that a gentleman should never rudely press the hand offered to him in salutation or shake it too violently, cautioning that such a person ought never to have an opportunity to repeat his offense. The Victorian handshake was supposed to be firm but measured, confident but not aggressive. Eye contact was important. The grip should last 2 or 3 seconds, no more. Stand at the proper distance, about 16 inches away. These rules were taught to young people as part of learning how to navigate society. The 20th century cemented the handshake's role in diplomacy and international relations. Photographs from the era show world leaders shaking hands to seal treaties, to signal the end of hostilities, to mark the beginning of new partnerships. Think of all the historic handshakes, leaders meeting after wars, politicians reaching across ideological divides, rivals acknowledging each other's humanity. The handshake between Israeli Prime Minister Yitzhak Rabin and Palestinian leader Yasser Arafat during the Oslo Accords in 1993, captured in an iconic photograph with President Bill Clinton watching, represented hope for peace in a troubled region. The handshake between President Richard Nixon and Chinese Premier Zhou Enlai in 1972 symbolized the thawing of relations between two nations that had been enemies. In business settings worldwide, the handshake became the standard opening and closing of meetings. Job candidates were advised that a good handshake could make the difference in an interview. Sales training emphasized the importance of a confident grip. The handshake conveyed messages about personality, about confidence, about trustworthiness. A weak handshake might suggest indecisiveness or lack of confidence. An overly strong grip might indicate aggression or a need to dominate. The perfect handshake landed somewhere in between, firm but not crushing, warm but not overly familiar, lasting just long enough but not too long. Different cultures around the world adapted the handshake to their own customs or maintained their traditional greetings alongside it. In Japan, the bow remained the primary greeting, though business people might shake hands with Western visitors. In India, the namaste, with palms pressed together and a slight bow, continued to be used, though handshakes became common in business settings. In parts of Africa, elaborate handshakes developed, sometimes involving multiple grips, finger snaps, or rhythmic movements. The basic gesture was adapted, modified, made local, but its fundamental message remained constant. I acknowledge you, I respect you, I come in peace. By the turn of the 21st century, the handshake had become perhaps the most universal gesture in the world, crossing cultural, linguistic, and national boundaries. A person from virtually any country could understand and respond to an outstretched hand. The gesture that had begun on dusty Greek roads 2,500 years ago, born from fear and the need to prove one was unarmed, had transformed into a symbol of connection, of our common humanity, of the possibility of trust between strangers. And now, as the first story slowly comes to rest, let your thoughts grow lighter. Let its images drift gently into the distance, like clouds passing across a quiet night sky. In this calm space between worlds, a new story is softly waiting, a new dream, a new path to follow. So take a slow, peaceful breath and allow yourself to drift into the next gentle tale. Close your eyes for a moment and picture this familiar scene, a darkened room, faces glowing in the warm amber light of candles, voices joining together in that timeless song, and then a single breath that sends tiny wisps of smoke spiraling upward toward the ceiling. It's a moment we've all experienced, a small ceremony so woven into the fabric of our lives that we rarely pause to wonder where it came from. But tonight, as you settle into comfort and let the day fall away, I invite you to journey back through the mists of time to a place where moonlight danced on marble temples, where the scent of honey and sesame drifted through cypress groves, and where a simple cake adorned with flickering flames was not a celebration of a single life, but a sacred offering to the divine. The birthday cake, that centerpiece of joy and sugar and frosting, carries within it a history older than you might imagine. Its story begins not in a bakery or a kitchen, but in the ancient temples of Greece, where worshippers gathered under the open sky to honor a goddess who walked between the wild places and the civilized world, between the darkness and the light. In the world of ancient Greece, where gods and goddesses walked among mortals in myth and imagination, there lived a deity of particular power and grace. Her name was Artemis, and she was known by many titles: goddess of the hunt, protector of wild animals, guardian of young women, and most beautifully for our story, goddess of the moon. Picture her now in your mind's eye as the ancient Greeks did. A young woman of fierce independence and gentle compassion, moving through silver-touched forests with a bough across her shoulder, her sandaled feet silent on the forest floor, her very presence seeming to illuminate the darkness like the lunar orb she represented. The worship of Artemis was widespread throughout the Greek world, from the great temple at Ephesus, counted among the 7 wonders of the ancient world, to small shrines tucked into rocky hillsides. But it was in Athens and the surrounding region of Attica where one particular ritual took place, a ceremony so beautiful and meaningful that its essence has traveled through millennia to touch our lives today. Every spring, around late April or early May, when the earth was awakening and flowers were beginning to unfurl their petals toward the warming sun, the people of Athens celebrated a festival called Munikia. This celebration was held on the 16th day of the lunar month, specifically timed to coincide with the full moon, that great glowing sphere that hung like a pearl in the velvet night sky. The festival honored Artemis in her aspect as moon goddess, that celestial light bringer who illuminated the darkness and guided travelers through the night. Imagine, if you will, the preparations for this sacred festival. In homes throughout the city, women worked in their kitchens, their hands dusty with flour, the air sweet with the scent of honey warming in clay vessels. They were preparing cakes, but not just any cakes. These were special offerings, crafted with intention and reverence, destined for the temple of the goddess herself. The cakes were made from simple but precious ingredients: dough fashioned from wheat or barley flour, enriched with golden honey that bees had gathered from wildflowers on the hillsides, and studded with sesame seeds that added a pleasant crunch and a nutty depth to the sweetness. The bakers shaped these cakes into perfect circles, round as the moon itself, each one a miniature echo of that luminous orb hanging in the heavens. The honey, sacred to the goddess, served as both sweetener and binding agent, its amber color and viscous texture transforming the simple flour into something approaching the divine. But the true magic happened next. When the cakes were ready, worshippers would carefully place small candles around the edges of each circular cake. These weren't the uniform birthday candles we know today, but rather small torches called dadia, little flames that flickered and danced in even the slightest breeze. The effect was breathtaking. These round cakes, glowing with candlelight, truly did resemble the full moon, capturing its gentle radiance in edible form. As evening approached and shadows lengthened across the city, processions would begin to form. Young girls, selected for their grace and piety, would be dressed in their finest garments, white chitons that caught the fading light, their hair adorned with fresh flowers or woven with ribbons. They would lift the sacred cakes onto trays, holding them carefully as the flames flickered and swayed. Then, to the sound of flutes and singing, they would begin the journey to Artemis's temple. Picture this procession moving through the streets as twilight deepened into night. The girls walked with measured, solemn steps, their faces serene in the candlelight, the small flames casting moving shadows on the walls of houses and shops they passed. Behind them came other worshippers, women and men of all ages, their voices lifted in hymns of praise to the goddess. The scent of honey and beeswax mingled with the evening air, and overhead, the full moon rose higher, watching this ceremony performed in her honor. At the temple itself, there was a moment of particular beauty and significance. The cakes would be presented, not simply placed on an altar, but positioned between two large burning torches called amphifontes. These great torches, one representing the east and one representing the west, framed the round candlelit cakes perfectly. The symbolism was profound and poetic. Here was the moon, represented by the circular glowing cake, caught between the rising and setting sun, that eternal dance of celestial bodies that marked the passage of time and the rhythm of life itself. In this quiet, sacred space, worshippers would stand in the presence of the goddess, the air thick with reverence and the mingled scents of honey, sesame, smoke, and the particular fragrance of olive oil lamps burning within the temple walls. The marble floors would be cool beneath their feet, worn smooth by countless generations of seekers who had come before. The statue of Artemis herself would gaze down upon them, perhaps carved from fine marble or cast in bronze, her expression at once fierce and protective, wild and benevolent. But the ritual was not yet complete. The most meaningful moment was still to come, the instant that would echo down through the centuries and become the heart of our own birthday tradition. You see, the ancient Greeks held a profound belief about the nature of smoke and fire. To them, flame was not merely a physical phenomenon, not simply heat and light produced by burning materials. Fire was sacred, a divine element that could serve as a bridge between the mortal realm and the dwelling places of the gods. When something burned, when it transformed from solid matter into smoke and ash, it was believed to be changing into a form that could rise upward, leaving the earthly plane and ascending to the heavens where the deities resided. This belief shaped countless rituals and offerings. When animals were sacrificed at altars, it was the rising smoke of the burning fat and bones that was considered the actual offering to the gods. When incense was lit in temples, worshippers would watch its fragrant smoke curl upward, carrying with it their prayers and petitions. And so it was with these moon cakes for Artemis. After the cakes had been presented, after prayers had been offered and hymns sung, the worshippers would lean forward and, with a gentle breath, extinguish the little candles adorning the cakes. In that moment, as each small flame flickered and died, releasing its final whisper of smoke into the air, the gathered people would make their wishes and speak their prayers. They believed, with a faith both simple and profound, that this smoke, this final exhalation of the divine fire, would rise upward through the columns of the temple, up past the painted ceiling beams, through the roof and into the open night sky, continuing its journey upward and upward until it reached the realm of the gods themselves. Picture that moment in your mind. The collective held breath, the soft exhalation, the sudden darkness as flames were snuffed out, and then the ghostly trails of smoke rising like translucent ribbons in the moonlight. Each tendril of smoke was a prayer, a hope, a whispered wish traveling from human hearts to divine ears. Parents might wish for the safety and happiness of their children. Young women might pray to Artemis for her protection and guidance as they transitioned into adulthood. Farmers might ask for favorable conditions for their crops, for the moon's light to bless their fields, for the wild animals under Artemis's care to remain in the forests and leave their livestock untouched. There was something deeply comforting in this belief, something that spoke to the human need to be heard, to know that our hopes and fears and dreams mattered to forces greater than ourselves. The smoke carried more than just wishes. It carried the essence of human longing, the universal desire for connection with something transcendent, something eternal. The entire ritual, from the baking of the honey cakes to the final wisp of smoke disappearing into the night, was an act of communion between mortals and immortals, between the earth and the sky, between the present moment and eternity. It was beautiful in its simplicity and profound in its meaning, a perfect blend of the tangible and the spiritual, the sweet and the sacred. As centuries passed and the ancient world gave way to new civilizations and beliefs, the worship of the Greek gods faded. Temples were abandoned, their marble columns toppling into ruin, their altars growing cold. The songs once sung to Artemis were forgotten, and the specific rituals of festivals like Munichia became distant memories, preserved only in the writings of scholars and historians. But traditions, especially those that touch something essential in the human spirit, have a remarkable ability to survive and transform. The core elements of that ancient Greek ritual, the round cake representing the moon, the candles mimicking celestial light, the act of extinguishing flames while making a wish. These things endured, changing shape as they traveled through time and across lands. The Romans, who absorbed so much of Greek culture, continued to use cakes in their celebrations, particularly for weddings and significant birthdays of important citizens and leaders. Their cakes were circular and flat, made with flour, nuts, and sweetened with honey, echoing their Greek predecessors. Candles, too, appeared in Roman celebrations, though their specific use varied depending on the occasion. Then, in the medieval period in Germany, something remarkable happened. A tradition emerged called Kinderfest, a festival specifically devoted to celebrating children's birthdays. In the 18th century, German families would prepare special cakes for their children on their birthdays, placing candles on top, one for each year of the child's life, plus an additional candle. This extra candle was called the light of life, representing hope for the coming year, the anticipation of another full rotation around the sun. But here's where the tradition took an interesting turn. Unlike our modern quick blowout after a birthday song, these Kinderfest candles were lit in the morning and allowed to burn throughout the entire day. The child would go about their daily activities, the cake sitting in a place of honor with its candles slowly melting, the light remaining present as a symbol of life's flame. Only at the evening meal, when family gathered together, would the child finally blow out the candles and make a wish. There was something profound in this patience, this allowing the light to burn throughout the day as a meditation on the passage of time and the preciousness of each lived moment. The Germans maintained that beautiful ancient belief about wishes traveling heavenward, though now filtered through Christian theology rather than Greek polytheism. Still, the essential magic remained. A wish made secretly, kept close to the heart, would have a better chance of coming true. The smoke still rose, prayers still traveled upward, and hope still burned as brightly as those small flames on the cake. As German immigrants crossed the Atlantic to America in the 18th and 19th centuries, they brought this tradition with them. It found fertile ground in the New World, spreading and evolving, merging with other customs and becoming increasingly elaborate. By the early 20th century, the birthday cake with candles had become a standard feature of American and European birthday celebrations, no longer reserved for the wealthy or particularly significant birthdays, but democratized, available to children and adults alike. And so, here we are today, thousands of years removed from those moonlit temple ceremonies in ancient Athens, yet still performing a ritual that would be recognizable to those ancient worshippers of Artemis. When we gather around a birthday cake, when we light those candles and sing our songs, when we watch the birthday person close their eyes, make a wish, and blow out the flames, we are participating in something far older and more profound than we usually realize. The details have changed, certainly. Our cakes are often elaborate confections of multiple layers, frosted in rainbow colors, decorated with fondant flowers or chocolate shavings or whimsical figurines. The candles come in packages from stores, mass-produced in cheerful colors. The songs we sing are relatively recent inventions, barely a century old, the occasion has shifted from a monthly celebration of a moon goddess to an annual celebration of an individual life. But look deeper, and you'll see the ancient thread still woven through this modern ceremony. The circular cake still echoes the full moon, even if we've long forgotten that symbolism. The candles still represent light in the darkness, life's flame burning bright against the void. The act of blowing them out, of transforming fire into smoke, still carries a whisper of that ancient belief in transformation and transcendence. And the wish, that most precious part, still reflects our very human need to hope, to dream, to believe that our deepest desires might somehow be heard and answered by forces greater than ourselves. When a child leans forward over their birthday cake, eyes squeezed shut in concentration, cheeks puffed with the breath that will extinguish those flames, they are, in a sense, standing in the same sacred space as those ancient Greek worshippers. The form is different, the context has changed, but the essence remains. A moment of pause, of intention, of hope made manifest through a simple physical act. The smoke still rises, carrying wishes upward. Whether we think of them traveling to the heavens, out into the universe, or simply into our own hearts as a reminder of what we truly want, what we deeply value, what we dare to dream. There's something wonderfully comforting in knowing this continuity, in understanding that our celebrations connect us not only to each other across distance and culture, but also backward through time to ancestors we'll never know, people who live completely different lives, but who still gathered together, still honored the sacred, still made wishes by candlelight. The birthday cake is more than dessert, more than a centerpiece for a party. It's a link in an unbroken chain stretching back to ancient temples and moon goddesses, forward into an unknown future where we can hope people will still gather, still light candles, still make wishes, and blow them out with hope in their hearts. So the next time you find yourself standing before a birthday cake, watching those candles flicker and glow, take a moment to marvel at the depth of this simple tradition. Think of those Greek worshippers with their honey and sesame cakes, of German children waiting all day for evening to fall, of countless millions across the centuries who have participated in this ritual of light and hope and wishes. Feel yourself part of that great river of human experience, connected across the vast expanse of time by something as simple and as profound as a cake, some candles, and a breath. And now, as your own eyes grow heavy and sleep begins to call you homeward, imagine yourself standing in that ancient Greek temple, the night air cool and fragrant, the moon hanging full and luminous overhead. You hold a round honey cake, warm in your hands, its surface dotted with small flickering flames that dance and sway. Around you, voices rise in song, ancient words in a language you don't understand but somehow feel in your bones. You close your eyes, make your wish, whisper your prayer, and then, with a gentle breath, you blow out the candles. The smoke rises, curling upward in the moonlight, carrying your hopes and dreams toward the stars. May your own wishes, whether spoken over birthday candles or held quietly in your heart, rise just as surely into the night. May you know yourself connected to this beautiful ancient tradition of hope and light. And may you sleep now, peaceful and content, wrapped in the knowledge that some things, the truly important things, the moments of celebration and joy and shared humanity, these endure across all the long centuries, unchanging in their essential beauty. And now, as the second story gently settles into silence, let your breathing become slow and easy. There is nothing you need to hold on to anymore. Let its last images drift away like mist in the early morning. In this quiet space, a third story is softly waiting, another dream, even deeper and calmer. So, relax completely and let us drift on. Close your eyes now and let yourself drift back through the centuries, back to a time when stone walls rose thick and cold against the night, when torches sputtered and hissed in iron sconces, casting shadows that danced like restless spirits across tapestried halls. Picture yourself standing in the doorway of a great medieval banquet hall, feeling the weight of history pressing down through the vaulted ceiling high above. The air is thick with wood smoke and the rich, almost overwhelming scent of roasted meat, of spiced wine warming in pewter vessels, of tallow candles burning with their distinct waxy perfume. And there, laid out before you on long oak tables worn smooth by countless feasts, you see them, the goblets, the chalices, the drinking horns, each one waiting to play its part in a ritual that is far darker, far more desperate than you might imagine. Tonight, as you settle into the comfort of your bed, as the modern world fades away and sleep begins to call you homeward, I invite you to discover the true story of the toast. Not the gentle clinking of glasses at weddings, not the cheerful cheers exchanged over birthday celebrations, but something altogether more sinister, more primal. This is the story of how fear shaped tradition, how the very real threat of death by poison transformed an ordinary gesture into a complex dance of survival, trust, and eventually into a spiritual blessing that would echo through the ages. The simple act of raising a glass and wishing someone good health carries within it a history written in wine, blood, and the perpetual shadow of betrayal. Imagine yourself now in the heart of a 13th century castle, in one of those great Norman fortresses that still dot the landscape of Europe today, their stone bones enduring through all the long centuries. You are standing in the great hall, the largest and most impressive room in the entire structure, where the stone walls rise 2 stories high before meeting overhead in a ceiling supported by massive oak beams, darkened by centuries of smoke from the central hearth. The hall is preparing for a feast. Servants move like shadows between the tables, their soft leather shoes making hardly a whisper against the cold stone floor. Their arms are laden with pewter plates, with wooden trenchers, with goblets of hammered silver for the Lord's table, and simple horn cups for those of lesser rank. The tables themselves are magnificent in their simplicity, long planks of ancient oak, scarred and stained by generations of use, set upon trestles and draped with linen cloths that, despite their coarse weave, represent considerable expense and status. But pay attention now to the atmosphere in this hall, to something you can almost taste in the air along with the smoke and spices. There is a tension here, a wariness, a careful watching. Notice how the cupbearer tastes the wine before it is poured for the Lord. Observe how the carver cuts the meat first for himself, taking a bite, waiting a moment before serving it to those at the high table. See how guests eye one another, how hands rest close to knife hilts, how conversations drop to whispers when certain names are mentioned. This is the medieval world, and death walks close beside every man and woman of power. Poisoning is not merely possible. It is expected, planned for, guarded against with every meal, every drink, every morsel of food that passes between hands. The threat is so real, so constant, that it has shaped the very architecture of trust itself. Wine is the preferred vehicle for poison, and this makes a terrible kind of sense. Medieval wine is nothing like the clear, filtered vintages we know today. It is cloudy, thick with sediment, full of particles that swirl and settle in the cup. The flavor is often harsh, acidic, requiring the addition of spices and even burnt bread to make it palatable. In such a murky liquid, what else might hide? What bitter powder, what deadly tincture might dissolve unseen among the dregs? Even without malicious intent, danger lurks in every cup. The wealthy drink from vessels glazed with lead, beautiful pottery that leaches poison slowly, surely, into everything it holds. Some deaths attributed to enemies are simply the slow accumulation of toxins from the very dishes meant to display status and refinement. And so a solution emerges, born not of ceremony, but of naked fear. If you cannot trust your drinking companions, if poison might wait in any cup, then let the wine be shared between vessels. Let each person's drink be tainted with a bit of their neighbor's, so that if one dies, all die. It is a brutal logic, a mutually assured destruction that transforms a feast into a treaty of survival. This is where the clashing of cups begins, not gently as we do it now, but forcefully, violently even. Watch as two nobles approach the moment of drinking. They raise their goblets, not in celebration, but in challenge. They bring them together with such force that wine sloshes over the rims, splashing between vessels, mixing in a way that cannot be faked or avoided. Each man's drink now contains drops from the other's cup. If one is poisoned, both will suffer. It is a grim guarantee, an assurance purchased with the threat of mutual death. Some sources describe an even more direct approach. Before drinking, a portion of wine would be deliberately poured from one person's cup into another's. This was not a gesture of generosity, but of verification, a physical proof that what you drink is what I drink, that our fates are bound together in this moment, that neither of us has poisoned the other, because to do so would be to poison ourselves. The table etiquette of the medieval nobility is built on these foundations of fear. Trustworthy friends, those who have proven themselves loyal through years of service or blood bonds, they can simply touch their cups together, the gentlest tap serving as both reminder and reassurance. We are safe together, this gesture says. You need not fear your cup, because I do not fear mine. But for strangers, for rivals, for those whose allegiances shift with political winds, the clashing must be real. The wine must truly mingle. The risk must be genuinely shared. Picture a particular feast now. Perhaps celebrating a military victory. Perhaps sealing a marriage alliance between rival houses. The hall glows with the light of 100 candles, their flames reflected in polished silver, in jeweled goblets, in the golden threads of tapestries depicting hunts and battles. The Lord sits at the high table, raised on a dais, so all can see him, can witness his power and his hospitality. He wears robes of deep velvet, wine-colored, with sleeves so long they brush the table. Fur lines his collar, and heavy rings weight his fingers. A visiting nobleman sits beside him, a potential ally, a necessary friend, but also a man whose ambitions might be served by the Lord's death. Between them hangs the question that hangs over all such gatherings. Can I trust you? Will I survive this night? When the moment comes to drink, when the steward has poured the spiced wine into both goblets, The two men turn toward each other. There is a long moment of eye contact, a weighing, a measuring. Then they lift their cups, and you can hear the metallic ring as the goblets come together hard enough that wine splashes, creating dark spots on the fine linen tablecloth, droplets catching the candlelight as they fall. Both men drink deeply, watching each other over the rims of their cups, and only when both have swallowed does the tension ease slightly. They have passed this test. For this moment, for this cup, they have proven to each other that they mean no harm. The ritual will repeat throughout the evening, with every course, with every cup, this perpetual verification of good intent. But the story of the toast does not begin in medieval halls, despite the legends that have grown there like ivy on castle walls. To find the true origins, we must travel much further back in time to the sun-washed lands of ancient Greece, where a very different kind of drinking ritual was taking shape. In the symposia of ancient Athens, wealthy men would gather after the evening meal for what was ostensibly a philosophical discussion, though in practice it often devolved into competitive drinking and entertainment provided by educated courtesans. The wine was served from a great communal vessel called a crater, a large ceramic bowl where the wine would be mixed with water in varying proportions. Guests would dip their own cups into this shared source, and herein lay the seed of trust that would grow into our modern toast. But the Greeks did not drink merely to intoxicate themselves. They drank to honor their gods, particularly Dionysus, the god of wine, festivity, and divine ecstasy. Before the serious drinking began, a libation would be poured, a measure of unmixed wine spilled onto the ground as an offering to the divine. Some of this precious liquid would be dedicated to Zeus, the savior, to the good spirit, to Hygeia, the goddess of health. Only after the gods had received their portion could mortals partake. This religious practice gradually expanded to include toasts to one's companions. Homer writes of it in the Odyssey, where Ulysses drinks to the health of Achilles. The gesture was simultaneously spiritual and social, a way of invoking divine blessing upon one's friends and allies. But there was also, even in these early days, an element of verification. The host would drink first from the shared crater, demonstrating that the wine was safe, that no poison lurked within. This was not paranoia, but practical caution in a world where political murders were common and poisoned wine was a known weapon. The Romans inherited this tradition from the Greeks, as they inherited so much else, and they transformed it in characteristically Roman ways. They gave us the Latin phrase propino, which means to drink to someone's health, and this became the foundation for our modern concept of toasting. The Roman Senate even passed a decree that made toasting a civic duty. At every meal, all citizens were required to drink to the health of Emperor Augustus. What began as a gesture of loyalty quickly devolved into an excuse for excessive drinking, as each toast required emptying the entire cup. But the Romans added another element that would give us the very word we use today: toast. You see, Roman wine was often harsh and acidic, barely palatable in its raw form. To improve the taste, the Romans would drop pieces of burnt or spiced bread into their wine. This bread, called tostus, in Latin meaning scorched or dried, would absorb some of the acidity, release its spices into the liquid, and make the whole mixture more pleasant to drink. Shakespeare himself references this practice in The Merry Wives of Windsor, where the character Falstaff calls for a quart of spiced wine and commands, put a toast in it. Over time, the word shifted its meaning. By the 18th century, toast no longer referred to the bread floating in the wine, but to the person honored by the drink. Someone particularly celebrated might become the toast of the town, the person whose health was drunk most frequently, whose name was spoken most often as glasses were raised. Throughout all these transformations, through Greek symposia and Roman feasts, through early Christian gatherings where wine was drunk to honor saints and martyrs, the fundamental gesture remained: the raising of a cup as a way of connecting human celebration to something beyond the merely mortal. Whether offered to gods or to honored guests, the toast was a bridge between the earthly and the eternal, between individual bodies sharing wine and the larger spiritual community to which they belonged. The thread of this tradition continues to weave through history, finding new expression in the Anglo-Saxon world. Here, in the mead halls of England, a new phrase enters our story, one that captures perfectly the transformation of the toast from a gesture of survival to one of blessing. "Waes Hael," the Saxon lord would cry, raising his horn or cup to his assembled followers. The words meant, "Be well," or "Be in good health," and they required a response. "Drink hael," meaning drink well. This exchange was not merely courtesy, it was the foundation of the social bond between lord and follower, master and servant, host and guest. Legend says that a beautiful Saxon maiden named Rowena was the first to speak these words. She presented a cup of wine to King Vortigern, greeting him with "Waes Hael," and so began a 1,000-year tradition. Whether the story is true matters less than what it represents. The idea that the toast is at its heart a gift, an offering, a wish for another's well-being that transcends the mere liquid being shared. From Waes Hael came the English word wassail, and with it a whole complex of winter traditions. Wassailing became the practice of going from house to house with a great bowl of spiced, warming drink, singing songs, offering blessings, receiving the hospitality in return. It was the precursor to Christmas caroling, but with a more agricultural purpose. People would also wassail their orchards, gathering around the best apple trees to sing them awake, to bless them for the coming growing season, to ensure a bountiful harvest. In these orchard ceremonies, you can see the full evolution of the toast from its dark medieval origins to something altogether more hopeful. The wassail queen would place a piece of toast soaked in the spiced drink into the branches of the finest tree. This was an offering to the tree spirits, a gift of sustenance, a wish for health and fertility. The gathered community would then drink from a shared bowl, passing it from person to person, each taking a sip and making a wish for the coming year. Notice what has happened here. The clashing of cups to mix the wine and avoid poison has transformed into the placing of toast in trees and the sharing of a communal bowl. The gesture of mutual assured survival has become a gesture of mutual blessing. The fear that once motivated the ritual has been slowly, gradually replaced by hope, by gratitude, by a sense of connection, not just between people, but between humanity and the natural world that sustains it. And so we arrive at the present day, at the gentle clinking of glasses that accompanies our celebrations. The journey has been long, the transformations profound, yet something essential has been preserved through all the centuries. When you raise a glass today, when you look into the eyes of your companions and say, "Cheers," or "To your health," or any of 100 other phrases used around the world, you are participating in a ritual that stretches back through medieval banquets, through Roman feasts, through Greek symposia, all the way to the first humans who discovered fermentation and understood that sharing drink could seal bonds of trust and community. The paranoia has faded. We no longer clash our cups with force, no longer pour wine between vessels to verify safety. The lead-glazed pottery and the murky, sediment-filled wine are gone. Poisoning at dinner parties is, thankfully, no longer a common concern. Yet the gesture persists, refined, civilized, but fundamentally unchanged in its purpose. We still use the toast to mark important moments: weddings and graduations, promotions and retirements, births and birthdays. We still raise our glasses to honor those we love, to wish them health and happiness and long life. We still understand, somewhere deep in our collective memory, that the act of drinking together creates a bond, a shared experience that transcends the individual. The word cheers itself comes from an old French word for face, because a cheerful face, a glad countenance, was the outward sign of good health and good spirits. When we toast, we wish each other that inner gladness, that well-being that radiates outward into the world. In some countries, the old traditions are maintained with surprising faithfulness. In Germany, you must make eye contact when you toast, or risk 7 years of bad luck. The gesture recalls that medieval moment of mutual verification, that locking of eyes over cups that might contain poison. In Spain and France and Italy, people still say salud or santé or salute, all versions of that ancient wish for health that echoed in Greek symposia and Roman banquets and Saxon halls. Even our modern table manners carry echoes of those dangerous medieval feasts. We still hold our glasses by the stem rather than the bowl, a practice that began partly to avoid warming the wine with our hands, but also to keep our grip firm in case we needed to clash cups forcefully. We still tap glasses together, though gently now, a symbolic remnant of that violent mingling that once meant survival. There is something deeply moving in this continuity, in knowing that a gesture you make casually at a birthday party or wedding reception connects you across the vast expanse of time to people who lived radically different lives, but who understood, as you understand, that sharing drink is a way of sharing life itself, of acknowledging our common humanity, our shared vulnerability, our mutual need for connection and trust. The next time you raise a glass, pause for just a moment. Feel the weight of it in your hand. Look at the faces around you, at the people with whom you are about to share this small ritual. Think of all those who came before, the nervous nobles in firelit halls, the Greek philosophers by their craters, the Roman senators drinking to Augustus, the Saxon villagers crying Waes Hael to the winter night, the wassailers blessing their orchards. You are part of this unbroken chain, this thread that winds through history, connecting fear to hope, survival to celebration, the merely human to the truly divine. And as you let this knowledge settle over you like a warm blanket, as your body sinks deeper into comfort and your mind begins to drift toward sleep, hold this final thought, that the toast, in all its forms, is ultimately about life itself, about wishing it for others, about celebrating it in ourselves, about acknowledging that we do not walk through this world alone, but in company with others, and that this company, this communion, is worth marking, worth honoring, worth preserving through all the long centuries from ancient times to this very night. And now, as the third story slowly dissolves into quiet, let your thoughts become soft and distant. There is no need to follow them anymore. Like gentle waves fading on a faraway shore, its last moments drift away. In this deep stillness, a fourth story is quietly waiting. One more gentle dream to carry you even further. So stay relaxed and let it begin. There's a peculiar moment that exists between the tickle and the release. That instant when your breath catches, suspended somewhere deep in your chest, when your eyes flutter closed and the world around you blurs into nothing. In that fleeting fraction of a second, ancient peoples believed something extraordinary was happening. They believed you were standing at a threshold balanced on the knife's edge between this world and whatever lies beyond. The sneeze, that most ordinary of bodily eruptions, was once considered a spiritual boundary, a doorway through which the soul itself might slip away. Picture yourself in an ancient marketplace, dust motes dancing in shafts of golden sunlight. The smell of spices and dried fish mingles with the earthier scent of unwashed bodies and animal hides. A merchant's child sneezes, and immediately voices rise in urgent prayer, not polite acknowledgement, but genuine, desperate invocation. Because in that moment, everyone present understood that the child had just brushed against death itself, had felt mortality's cold breath on their face. The sneeze was never just a sneeze. It was a reminder that we are fragile creatures, housed in temporary vessels, and that the force that animates us, call it soul, call it spirit, call it the breath of life, could depart at any moment through the very passages it used to enter. The ancient Egyptians understood the head to be humanity's citadel, not merely a container for the brain, but a fortress where reason itself took up residence, where consciousness dwelled like a pharaoh in a palace. Within this sacred architecture, every function held meaning. They believed the soul was not some abstract, invisible essence, but something tangible, something that moved with the very air we breathe. When you inhaled, you drew in not just oxygen, but life force itself. When you exhaled, you expelled not just carbon dioxide, but a small portion of your being. For the Egyptians, sneezing held particular significance based on the position of the moon relative to zodiac signs. Imagine the priests studying the heavens, marking the movements of celestial bodies, all to understand what a sneeze might portend. Was it fortune? Was it disaster? The answer lay written in the stars, in the alignment of cosmic forces beyond human control. They dignified even this seemingly insignificant act with astrological importance because they understood that nothing about the human body was truly insignificant. Every breath, every heartbeat, every involuntary spasm connected us to forces greater than ourselves. The Greeks inherited this reverence and transformed it into something else entirely. In their worldview, sneezes became messages from the gods themselves. A sneeze occurring after a serious statement or decision was interpreted as divine confirmation, a sign of approval from the immortals. Picture the great halls where philosophers debated the nature of reality, where generals planned campaigns that would reshape the known world. A sneeze at the right moment could sway decisions, could confirm or deny the wisdom of actions about to be taken. In Homer's ancient epic, Princess Penelope prayed desperately for her husband Odysseus to return from his long journey. Her son Telemachus sneezed, and in that explosive exhalation, she heard the gods answer. Yes, they seemed to say through that involuntary spasm, yes, he will return. The Romans, ever practical even in their superstitions, developed elaborate customs around the direction of a sneeze. A sneeze to the right was considered fortunate, while one to the left brought ill omens. Imagine the anxiety of trying to control which direction your head turned when that irresistible tickle began building in your nose. The poet Catullus wrote of Love himself sneezing auspiciously at a woman's birth, marking her as blessed from her first breath. These weren't casual metaphors. They reflected a deep, pervasive belief that the boundary between body and spirit was thin as silk, that divine forces manifested themselves in the smallest physical acts. In Jewish tradition, the belief ran even deeper and darker. Ancient Hebrew scholars taught that from creation until the time of Jacob, people didn't experience illness. They simply died when their time came, and this death arrived through a sneeze as the soul departed through the nostrils. Death came swiftly, unexpectedly, riding on the back of what seemed like the body's most innocent reflex. Imagine living with that knowledge, that understanding. Every sneeze could be your last. Every person who sneezed near you might be experiencing their final moment on earth. The blessing offered wasn't mere politeness. It was an attempt to anchor the soul, to call it back from whatever threshold it had approached, to deny death its claim for just a little longer. These ancient peoples understood something we've largely forgotten in our modern, medicalized world. They understood that breath is the first thing we do when we enter this world and the last thing we do before leaving it. The Latin word spiritus means both breath and spirit. Inspiration and expiration aren't merely medical terms. They're theological statements about the nature of life and death. To breathe in is to draw spirit into the body. To breathe out, especially suddenly and violently as in a sneeze, is to risk losing that spirit entirely. The ancients lived closer to death than we do, watched it claim friends and family with shocking regularity, and so they noticed these thin places, these moments when the veil between worlds seemed particularly gossamer. Now let us travel forward through the centuries to Rome in the year 590. The city that once conquered the known world finds itself besieged by an enemy it cannot see, cannot fight, cannot defeat through force of arms. The bubonic plague is spreading across Europe and will eventually claim between 25 and 50 million lives. Imagine the streets of eternal Rome, once filled with the proud footfalls of legionnaires and the chatter of merchants, now echoing with funeral processions and the prayers of the desperate. The plague doesn't announce itself with trumpets or declarations of war. It comes quietly, insidiously, first as a tickle in the throat, a sudden urge to sneeze. Then come the other symptoms. The fever that makes your skin burn as if you're standing too close to a forge. The fatigue that presses down on you like the weight of the earth itself. The swellings that appear like dark fruits ripening beneath your skin. But it's the sneeze that everyone watches for, the sneeze that sends a shiver of terror through crowded rooms and makes friends step back from friends, family from family. Pope Pelagius II, shepherd of the faithful, protector of souls, dies sneezing. His body is carried through streets lined with the fearful and the grieving, and everyone present understands the message. If a plague can fell a pope, a man supposedly protected by God's special grace, then no one is safe. The heavy velvet of his ceremonial robes, the gold thread worked into religious symbols, the incense burning in censers, none of it could protect him from a death that arrived on the wings of an involuntary breath. Pope Gregory I, who assumes the papacy following Pelagius's death, issues a decree on February 16th in the year 600. The decree is simple, direct, and born of desperation. Whenever anyone sneezes, those present must immediately say, "God bless you," not as a nicety, not as a pleasantry, but as a prayer for survival, as a verbal shield erected against the approaching shadow of death. Imagine the sound of it spreading through medieval Rome. A child sneezes in a market square, and a chorus of voices rises, "Deus te adjuvet," may God help you. A merchant sneezes behind his counter of brass scales and clay amphoras, and customers step back while murmuring their protection prayers. A mother wakes in the dark of night to her infant's sneeze and whispers blessings over the cradle, her hands trembling as she touches the child's forehead, feeling for the fever that so often follows. The streets themselves seem to hold their breath. The sound of wooden cartwheels on ancient cobblestones, the call of roosters at dawn, the ringing of church bells marking the hours, all of it continues, but underneath runs a current of fear. Every sneeze is a potential death sentence. Every blessing is an attempt to bargain with forces beyond human understanding. Pope Gregory doesn't just suggest this practice, he commands it, makes it mandatory, transforms it from superstition into holy obligation. Picture a feast in a noble's house, candles burning in iron holders, casting dancing shadows on stone walls hung with tapestries depicting saints and biblical scenes. The smell of roasted meat mingles with the sweetness of mead and the mustiness of wool. Someone sneezes, and the room falls silent. For a heartbeat, 2 heartbeats, 3, silence absolute. Then the blessings come, tumbling over each other in urgency. The sneezer's face pales, knowing what everyone else knows. This might be the beginning of the end. In a week, perhaps less, they might be wrapped in linen, buried in consecrated ground, another number added to the endless tally of the dead. Sneezing became recognized as the first symptom of infection with the plague, and so the blessing transformed from spiritual protection into something more desperate, a last-ditch prayer that perhaps, just perhaps, divine intervention might spare this person from the fate that had claimed so many others. It was a way of saying, "We see you standing at death's door. We acknowledge the danger you're in, and we're calling upon the highest power we know to pull you back from that threshold." The plague would eventually retreat, as plagues do, leaving behind a devastated continent and a custom so deeply ingrained that it would outlive the danger that spawned it by more than 1,000 years. But in those dark days when every sunrise brought fresh funerals and every sunset left new orphans, the sneeze blessing wasn't quaint or old-fashioned. It was survival. It was hope. It was humanity's refusal to surrender without a fight, even when the fight seemed hopeless. As Europe emerged from the worst of the plague years and entered what we now call the Middle Ages, the sneeze took on new layers of supernatural significance. The Church, which had become the primary interpreter of all phenomena, natural and supernatural, taught that human beings existed in a state of perpetual spiritual warfare. Angels and demons fought for every soul, and the body itself was a battleground where this cosmic struggle played out in everyday moments. Medieval belief held that sneezing left the body spiritually unguarded, creating an opening through which the devil could enter and claim a person's soul. Imagine living with that knowledge, with that constant awareness of vulnerability. You walk through your day knowing that at any moment, without warning, your body might betray you by creating a doorway for evil. The sneeze, which you cannot control, which comes upon you suddenly and violently, becomes a moment of pure spiritual danger. Picture a monastery at midnight, monks gathered for prayer in a chapel lit only by flickering candles. The smell of beeswax and old stone, the whisper of prayers in Latin, the creak of wooden pews as bodies shift in the cold. A young novice sneezes, breaking the sacred silence, and immediately the brothers around him make the sign of the cross and murmur their blessings. They're not annoyed at the interruption, they're frightened for him. In that explosive exhalation, they imagine demons circling like wolves, looking for any opening, any weakness in the spiritual armor that prayer and faith provide. But medieval theology also presented a more complex picture, because humans have always understood that reality resists simple explanations. An alternative belief held that sneezing actually expelled the devil from a person's soul. But the blessing was necessary to prevent the demon from immediately re-entering the body. So the sneeze became a moment of both danger and opportunity, a chance for the soul to purge itself of evil, but only if properly protected by divine blessing in the vulnerable moments that followed. Think about what this meant for the average person in medieval Europe. You're a farmer, perhaps, or a craftsman. Your days are filled with hard physical labor, with the smell of turned earth or the tang of hot metal, with the weight of tools in your calloused hands. You understand your world through the teachings of the Church, which tells you that invisible forces surround you constantly, that Satan himself walks the earth, seeking souls to devour. And then you feel that familiar tickle in your nose, that irresistible urge building. The blessing, God bless you, becomes a form of linguistic magic, a verbal shield erected in the split second when you're most vulnerable. Words were understood to have power in medieval thought. The right words, spoken with the right intention, could move heaven itself. Prayers could heal the sick, curses could blight crops, and a blessing could slam shut the spiritual door that a sneeze had inadvertently opened. The phrase wasn't social convention, it was spiritual combat. Medieval life was soaked in this kind of supernatural awareness. People saw signs and omens everywhere, understood the world as a place where the physical and spiritual realms overlapped and intermingled. A black cat crossing your path, salt spilled on the table, a raven calling at dusk. All of these carried meaning, all connected to forces beyond the visible world. The sneeze fit perfectly into this worldview, this understanding that human existence balanced precariously between salvation and damnation, between divine protection and demonic predation. Centuries have passed since Pope Gregory issued his decree, since medieval monks feared the devil in every sneeze. We understand now that a sneeze is nothing more than the body's attempt to expel irritants from the nasal passages, that it's caused by dust or pollen or the common cold, that souls don't live in our breath and demons don't wait at our nostrils. We've measured it, studied it, reduced it to neural pathways and muscular contractions. We know that your heart doesn't actually stop, that you're not in any spiritual danger, that death isn't waiting in the wings. And yet, walk through any public space, a coffee shop, an office, a grocery store, and when someone sneezes, listen. Bless you, comes the response, automatic as breathing itself. We say it without thinking, without believing in soul theft or demonic possession or divine omens. We say it because generations upon generations have said it, because the custom has worn grooves so deep in human behavior that we follow them without conscious thought. But perhaps there's something else at work here, something older than Pope Gregory's decree, older than Roman superstition or Egyptian astrology. Perhaps what we're really doing when we bless a sneezer is acknowledging their vulnerability, their humanity, their momentary loss of control. In that explosive exhalation, we see someone else as utterly, completely human, subject to forces they cannot command, ruled by reflexes they cannot suppress. And in our blessing, we're saying something that transcends superstition. I see you. I acknowledge this small moment of your existence. May you be well. The words vary around the world as they always have. Germans say Gesundheit, health. Turks offer Çokyasha, live long. The French wish à tes souhaits, to your wishes. Different languages, different cultures, different belief systems, but all expressing the same fundamental impulse to acknowledge another person's moment of vulnerability with words of care. In some Asian cultures, sneezing passes without comment, but even in silence, there's acknowledgement. Even in saying nothing, we're saying something about how we understand the boundaries between self and other, between private bodily functions and public social space. We are creatures who have always sought meaning in patterns, who have always tried to understand the mysterious forces that govern our existence. Our ancestors looked at a sneeze and saw death, saw the soul's departure, saw demons waiting to invade. We look at a sneeze and see mucous membranes and irritants and evolutionary adaptations. Both perspectives, in their way, are attempts to make sense of our place in a universe that doesn't always make sense, to find meaning in moments that seem too small to matter. But every sneeze is a breath, and every breath is a reminder that we are alive, that we are breathing when we might not be, that we exist in bodies that will someday stop existing. The ancient fear wasn't entirely wrong. The sneeze is a boundary, not between this world and the spiritual realm perhaps, but between conscious control and involuntary reflex, between the body we think we command and the body that acts according to its own ancient programming. In that moment, when you cannot stop yourself from sneezing, you are reminded that you are not entirely in control, that you inhabit a body with its own needs, its own responses, its own relationship with the air around you. So the next time someone near you sneezes and you find yourself automatically saying, "Bless you," know that you're participating in something profound. You're continuing a tradition that stretches back through Pope Gregory's desperate plague years, through medieval fears of demonic possession, through Roman omens and Greek prophecies and Egyptian astrology, all the way back to the first humans who noticed that sometimes breath leaves us more violently than usual and who wondered what it might mean. You're acknowledging in that brief phrase the fragility of human life, the kindness we owe each other, the small acts of care that make society possible. And perhaps, in some way we can't quite articulate, in some part of ourselves that remembers older ways of knowing, we're still praying for each other's breath, still offering protection against the darkness, still saying to one another, "May you be well, may you be safe, may you continue breathing." Because breath is life, and life is precious, And the simple act of acknowledging someone else's existence, even in something as small as a sneeze, is perhaps the most human thing we do. So when you feel that tickle building, when you sense the sneeze approaching like a wave you cannot stop, remember that you're standing in a long line of humans who have sneezed before you. And when someone blesses you, know that they're offering something their ancestors would recognize: a prayer, a wish, a small act of connection. In this fractured, complicated modern world, it's one of the few remnants of ancient community we still practice without question. Bless you. May you be well. May you keep breathing. May we all continue this small tradition, this tiny acknowledgement that we are, all of us, vulnerable creatures, making our way through an uncertain world, protected only by the kindness we show each other and the words we speak to ward off the darkness. And so tonight, as you drift toward sleep, think about all the little habits you've practiced throughout your life. Each one represents a quiet moment of connection, a tiny echo of the many ancient traditions that shaped how humans live together. From the earliest rituals of our ancestors to the simple gestures we still use today, these everyday habits have carried us through centuries, adapting and evolving, but never losing their core meaning. I see you, I respect you, I trust you. Let that thought comfort you as sleep approaches. We humans have been reaching out to each other hand to hand, heart to heart, for thousands of years, and we'll continue doing so, finding new ways to say the same ancient thing: I come in peace. If you enjoyed tonight's story, please remember to like this video and subscribe to Pillow Trace for more calming stories to help you drift off to sleep. Sweet dreams, and may your rest be peaceful.